Some weeks ago, with my thoughts wrapped around the Mediterranean boat people, I left my apartment in Geneva and took a drive. This crisis, along with that of the Rohingyas in Southeast Asia, has thrown the world into widespread dismay. People like us, but infinitely more desperate, whole families, share their suffering involuntarily with us, courtesy of our flat screens and iPads as they drift over or sink into massive blue cemeteries. And so on a temperamental spring day, I drove to a lovely spot on the southern bank of Lake Geneva. My destination was the Hôtel Royal in Évian. It was there in July 1938 that 31 nations met for a shameful discussion that has been virtually airbrushed from our memory. The Evian Conference was convened by Franklin D. Roosevelt in response to the massive looming refugee crisis triggered by Hitler's virulent anti-Semitism. Following the German annexation of Austria in March 1938, faced with violent assaults and the seizure of personal property, restrictions of their freedom, campaigns of racial insults, and in deep and very rational fear, Jews had begun to leave Germany and Austria in large numbers. FDR felt that no country, certainly not his, would be able to solve this crisis alone. Only a collective solution, he believed, could meet the challenge. Hitler, too, was hoping that other countries would accept the Jews he was also trying to expel. In a speech in Königsberg 4 months before the Evian Conference was convened, he jeered, and I quote, "I can only hope and expect that the other world, which has felt such deep sympathy for these criminals, will be generous enough to transform this pity into practical aid. As far as I'm concerned, we are ready to place our luxury ships at the disposal of these countries for the transportation of these criminals." End quote. Indeed, Hitler was already placing many of them forcibly on ships and sending them to various destinations in the Mediterranean and across the Atlantic. And yet, in Évian that July, although many delegations voiced eloquent dismay over the torment experienced by the Jews of Germany and Austria, those sentiments were rhetorical only, for the outcome of the meeting was a polite but blank denial of reality. Neither Europe, nor the United States, nor Australia would accept the refugees in any meaningful number. In the verbatim record, 2 words were uttered over and over again: density and saturation. The European countries were already beset with population density and had reached a point of saturation. In other words, there was simply no more room at the world's ends. It was an absurd thing to say, of course, in 1938, given the size of Europe's population today, and it would be an equally ridiculous thing to say now. The participants in Évian could not, of course, have perceived the future unfolding of the Holocaust, nor foreseen that Europe was being drawn into another devastating war. And yet, the absence of conscience on the part of the delegations at Évian was breathtaking. Even their oral interventions were kept short, with many participants lured by the outdoor activities awaiting them at the spa. The Nazis must have reveled in the knowledge that their anti-Semitism found a faint or not so faint echo in the rest of Europe. They also came to realize that if expulsion was becoming increasingly difficult, slave labor and extermination eventually for them would be alternatives. Ironically, many of those countries refusing to take in refugees were themselves in due course occupied and brutalized by the same Nazis and yearned for the compassion they denied the Jews in July 1938. And so what of today? It is clear the Europe of 2015 is not the Europe of 1938. There are many European countries, led by Germany and now also France, who are prepared to consider very seriously, working along with the European Commission, not just the numbers of people that they should resettle, but fixing on a broader, more comprehensive treatment of the crisis. And we support them in their effort to do so and to do more. It is tough, however, as other European countries doggedly reject any proposal requiring them to accept more migrants. And I worry, will this second category of countries ultimately set the trend? Look at the Syrian refugees. Only a small number of countries around the world, led by Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan, have since 2011 shown unfailing generosity, while most who could have helped have not done so and remain in moral default. Must we not ask ourselves, therefore, what will be our future if we succumb to a thinness of mind, to a fanatic populism, where our fears are so easily stirred, our reasoning so easily subdued? If all states in due course mimic the most anti-immigrant of countries and garrison their foreign policy with barbed wire, machine gun nests, and naval vessels, impenetrable to the suffering of the wretched who flee war and persecution, what will be our common destination then? To what address will humanity go?